Hi, welcome to my channel where we question everything. Today's topic is why I disagree with everybody else and myself, and you can call it part 2. Now, before I even start with the topic, I just want to make some points clear. I am pro-Russians, and most of the videos I do are about pro-Russian punters, and you should have realized by now to whom I'm referring to. And there's a reason for that. Now, I've been following these guys for a long time, and I've listened to them. And while sometimes they said things that I didn't agree with, and I left some comments on some of the guys' blogs, and leaving comments at YouTube videos when there's a lot of them isn't really effective, or that it will be noticed. And that was one of the reasons why I started this channel. Well, part of it. Now, why don't I make any videos of why I disagree with pro-Ukrainian commentators? Well, really? If I have to select some of those commentators, then I will make videos 8 hours long. Because nothing that they say makes any sense, or is in relation to any reality on the ground. So, yes, I will make some videos about them. I have made one about Michael Kofman. I have watched some videos of him, and I will make a why I disagree video with him. But recently there are so many narratives on the pro-Russian punters that I can't help myself, but I first have to react on them. And when I was to ask a question, am I a Ukrainian troll? No, I'm not a Ukrainian troll. I'm actually pro-Russian. But I've noticed that the pro-Russian guys are also living in a bubble, and they call it like a circular argument. They're quoting each other. The same thing that we are actually blaming the pro-Ukrainian and the Western commentators, that they believe their own narrative. And I see the same thing actually happening on the pro-Russian side. Now, please remember, I cannot understand Russian, so I cannot really get up to date on what they say. But I have some information today about what they say. And unfortunately, Google Translate is not always accurately, so you can miss the point. But let's see what they say. And the argument I always try to, an alternative that I can supply is that when you have a barbecue, do you invite your enemies to have a discussion with them, or do you invite your friends to join you at the barbecue? And then do you have a discussion with your friends? And do you always agree? No, you disagree. Because each one of us has individual views of what the situation is. But unfortunately, especially when you go to the Duran's live podcast, you will always find that all the guys that they invite agree with them. Now, if everybody agrees with everybody else, what's the point of having an argument? Are you just trying to validate your own arguments by referring to other people? You will also notice that I never refer to any other paper unless it gives you a reference where you can look at what I'm actually discussing, to just show the other side of the argument so you can make your mind up yourself. So, I'm not a Ukrainian troll. I am not a supporter of the Ukrainian side. I am actually pro-Russians. Are the Russians angels? No, they are not angels. Do they have their faults? Yes, they have their faults. Am I living in Russia? No, I'm living in South Africa. And as I've stated many times in my videos, I have a bird's eye view because I have no, as you call it, skin in the game. I'm far away. But I'm very interested, and I started basically becoming interested in international politics with the first bombing of Yugoslavia or Serbia, if you want to call it. And then I got really involved on the first Gulf War. And after that, it just escalated, and hey, it's one of my hobbies, all my fields of interest. So let's get on with today's video. And basically, the first item that I would like to address is a recent article by Larry Johnson. Now, I respect Larry very much. He doesn't really make any errors or assessments in that respect, and what he writes has a lot of sense. But for some other reason, he's doing now the same narrative without seeing the bigger picture or acknowledging at least what's happening on the ground. So let's talk about the article I read on the 5th of October, which is called More Military and Economic Consideration in Ukraine. And then actually mocks the current advance of the Ukrainian forces. And then he shows you a nice video of the open plains and how easy it is to conquer open spaces. And then he points out that the Ukrainians are not conquering any large cities. And it said for him somehow it's bad. And he downplays the territorial gains that the Ukrainian army has made. And I actually would like to provide a quote what he has said from his article. Even if this is not the Russian plan, in other words, baiting the Ukrainians, which we all said was our initial assessment, the outcome will be the same. Ukraine will have to conduct a frontal assault on the city of Kherson, and in order to do this, we'll have to mass troops and equipment that will be easy targets for Russian artillery, missiles, and bombs. Ukraine has no military power to counter what Russia can unleash. So if your panties are in a knot over Russia loses territory, I suggest you take a nap on a fainting couch and calm down. And then he refers to the offense of Mariupol and what the Russians did there. And then he refers basically to another side of the conflict, and I quote again, "The United States and Europe got a big bucket of cold water poured over their heads today with the OPEC Plus announcement that they will cut production by 2 million barrels of oil. No matter how much lipstick Biden and Blinken try to put on this pig, OPEC Plus message to the West is clear, fuck off. If foreigners really believe that Russia was getting its ass handed to it, do you think the OPEC nations would stick the neck out and adopt a policy of pro-Russia? I don't." Now, these are just two quotes of his things. So let's take the first paragraph or the first quote he actually mentioned. The Ukrainian forces are gaining ground in Kherson. They are advancing. The Russians are retreating. And just put something like in perspective. What does retreat actually mean? Retreat means you've lost the battle. There's somebody attacking you and you have to defend it. Now you have two choices. You can either fight and die to the last man, or you can retreat. But in whatever you want to say, you've lost the battle because you cannot sustain the defense of that position. Now retreating has to have a benefit. If you retreat, you have to retreat to a position which is more favorable and is where you are able to defend the line better. If you retreat to a position that is not better than the position you are in now, then you should actually defend that position. Because it makes no sense to retreat. You're just going to move backwards, lose the fight again, retreat again, lose the fight then, retreat again, because you're always in a weaker position. So you have to have a defense line in your backup that is better than the one you have now. And it doesn't, well, if you look at the northern offense of the northern conflict or portion of the conflict, then you will find that the Russians are retreating, but they are not retreating to better positions. They're just retreating. So does it sound as if the Russians are winning? Does it sound as if we can say the Ukrainian offense is negligible? No, you can't say that. And then Larry makes a statement that the Ukrainians, in terms of military power, are inferior to the Russians in terms of artillery and aviation and so on. Really. So the Ukrainians have no artillery and no tanks and no APCs and so on, and no aviation, by the way. Yes, they still have the aviation, because according to the Department of Defense, the Russian Department, daily briefings, they're shooting down Su-25s, and yesterday they shot down a MiG-29. I've handled the situation, the matter. I don't understand why the Ukrainians still have an air force. I thought all the aircrafts have been destroyed. And if you look at the numbers, I never knew that Ukraine had so many aircraft, because it's not on any database or any article describing the Ukrainian forces before the February. So I don't understand the numbers being presented by the Russian military defense, because we all can see there are still aircraft flying, Ukrainian aircraft flying. So it's again a narrative that has been established by the pro-Russians, which is untrue. It's still going on. So don't say that the Ukrainians don't have the necessary hardware. And then they have to amass, and then Larry goes on, and then he says they have to enforce or gather a huge Ukrainian force in order to attack a city. And he mentioned the matter of Mariupol. Now just stand a little bit back. Firstly, let's discuss Mariupol. So there were how many Ukrainian soldiers locked up in Mariupol? They were basically effectively cut off from any supply lines, from the sea, from any land base. The Russians basically encircled Mariupol, and then the Russians went in, but in a city environment, it is close combat, door to door. Tanks are not really effective. APCs are not effective. The only effective military equipment that you can use is the infantry. And then you can try to do artillery attacks on certain defensive positions and so on, but there's a lot of buildings, and it will not be so easy to target a certain building. Then you can have aviation, yes. But a city is totally different from open plains. And you need foot soldiers for that, which the Ukrainian army has plenty of. It actually lacks the other hardware in numbers. So that's one thing. From a battle point of view, the Ukrainians have no disadvantage, or very little disadvantage, in doing an urban fight. But the Russians are hamstrung, even by the military equipment. There are civilians in that city. It's not a small city. And they don't want to destroy the city per se, the buildings. And they want to protect the civilians. So they are actually handicapped. So is this whole scenario of the Ukrainian forces being able to conquer Kherson such a bad idea? I don't believe so. But then I'm also an armchair general. But Larry is even worse in that aspect. Sorry to say. And then we have the second paragraph, when we talk about the economic conditions, and the OPEC's plus announcement that they will cut 2 million barrels of oil per day. But there are actually two sides to the whole problem, or two sides to that news. The first one is the political issue, and the second one is the economic issue. And if you listen to the commentators or the interviews of the OPEC members, especially Saudi Arabia, they categorically state that this is not a political decision, it's an economic decision. They expect a downturn in global affairs, they do see that Europe and America has high inflation, so the demand will fall. And basically they are preemptive in terms of cutting back their daily production. Yes, they do produce a significant portion or control a significant portion of the daily oil production in the world. But in total, cutting back the 2 billion or 2 million barrels a day is about, I think, 4% that they call. Yes, the Americans have threatened Saudi Arabia, and they will take out all the tools, typical like they do. They're probably going to do some sanctions or some, I don't know, they're always threatening. And they always have sanctions. So I'm not sure what the Americans are going to do, but, well, we can expect their usual behavior. But is it detrimental to the West? Yes, this is in a form detrimental to the West. It will probably result in oil prices, but once the economy slows down, there will be less demand for oil, and the price will fall. And if I understand it correctly, then the highest consumption of oil is usually in the summer month, and we are in the northern hemisphere. And we have come to the end of that summer. We are now approaching winter. So it's quite logical that the demand for oil will decrease. But on the other hand, America has released their reserves, some of their reserves that they have to refill. And Europe is trying to ban basically Russian oil. And they have now today issued the 8th package, if I'm correct, of sanctions, which includes a cap on oil pricing for delivery of Russian oil by tanker fleet to other countries except Europe, which is quite funny. So there's already a slowdown in oil, so it makes it very difficult for the OPEC to really make a decision, but we are not looking short term. This will only be starting to implement in November, which is much nearer to winter, if it's not part of winter. So we'll see what will happen. But making such a statement is a wild statement. Okay, so then we move to the other side and be a bit more, getting more to ground level. Oh no, before I do that, actually. So Larry shows a nice video of APCs, I believe it's APCs, crossing plains at high speed. And this is now an example of the Ukrainian army conquering now open spaces, ill-defended, scarcely populated, scarcely defended positions. And it's all fine. But there are two things to that video, by the way. Firstly, these APCs are not crawling, they are motoring it down the open field. And what that effectively means is that they are incredibly mobile. And are we not talking about the high mobility of the war, the Russian side at least? So why can't the Ukrainians have a high mobility type of warfare? So I don't see the badness about this video. It actually shows you a little bit about the terrain in that area, and the fact that these vehicles move at a high speed, which makes them very difficult to target. But then the second comes into them, then you look a little bit further, and you see a row of trees in the distance. And then we have discussed it many times. What's the range of any artillery? And the artillery is between 20 and 40 kilometers or 45 kilometers. And as I said in a previous video, go outside. Go to a rural area and go see how far is 20 kilometers physically. Go see how far is 40 kilometers physically. That's a huge difference. And then if you want to now counter an attack by APCs and so on, and say there are 10 of them, and they're all charging over the open field, and you now got 155 artillery on the other side, that's now going to bombard this attack of APCs on the open plain. Then you have to ask yourself, but how many artillery pieces do you need to fire at the same time in order to saturate that area? How much, and what would the fire rate be? And just remember, these guys are moving at an incredible speed, so you have to constantly adjust your cannon sights. This is no easy task. And I'm not totally sure, but is a grad system and so on able to penetrate the armor of an APC? A 155 years will probably do it, but would it need a direct hit, or how far should it be away from APC before it penetrates the armor? Nobody of us really knows that. Hopefully I will make a video and I will discuss a little bit about armaments so we can get perspective on what is really happening and what war actually means, what the conflict means, and what options generals usually have in determining or what strategies that they should be using. So I would like to now go to these articles that I've mentioned. They are from South Front. Yes, you can express your criticism of southfront.org, but it's the only website that predicted Izium correctly. And there was a lot of critique against the website about that, but they were correct and the rest were all wrong. But I like them. They give a lot of videos and so on, and they have some articles. So let me read some of them. Now I will leave links to these various articles. You can watch them, you can go and read it yourself. But mostly what is discussed is in that article, so I don't see the need for that. But the first article is a military reporter on why Russians are retreating in Ukraine. And the guy that actually made a video, it's a Russian guy. Now, South Front actually gave us a transcript of his video. But the military reporter is Vladimir Tartarsky, and he's from the Donbass. And in 2014, he joined the People's Militia of Karlovka, and he served in some regiment of the LPR. But he left that, and then today he's a special military correspondent on the front line. And on October the 3rd and 4th, he released some videos. Now just remember, this is a guy on the front line. He's not sitting at home like we do. Now, is this guy credible? Well, I'd rather believe him than you or one of the punters, because he's there. Any case, so we talk about the situation in the Kherson direction, and he states the situation in the Kherson direction remains alarming. And the enemy tried to advance near the Dnieper on Berislav. And here's the portion I would like to emphasize. The AFU also attacked and want to cut off the upper part of the Kherson ledge. Our troops provided desperate resistance and beat the enemy. I contacted the guys. They say that a lot of Ukrainian soldiers were killed there in this meat grinder, similar to like in the First World War. They say, actually, they say thousands are lying there, but this reporter says probably more, a couple of hundreds or more. And then he states further, near crossing Liman, The situation is again alarming. Krasny Liman was taken, and the enemy is eager for Kremenaya further to Svatova. And then he mentions some other names and so on, which I'm not going to read. And then he says, I confess honestly, I do not justify anyone. This is a shameful defeat under Krasny Liman, a shameful defeat under Balaklaya, Izium. But if you look objectively, even if the enemy will move further, he will not decide the outcome of the war. No way. He will not decide out. No, that is like boosting your self-confidence, the rest of the paragraph. But it was a shameful defeat of Liman and a shameful defeat of Balaklaya and Izium. Those are Russian speaking, or at least Donbass speaking, which we are now calling the Russian people. So it's a Russian speaking. And then he goes on, the fall of the Kherson bridgehead will of course change the situation at the front very much. Firstly, we will not have a bridgehead on the right bank. We will not be able to advance to Nikolaev. But on one day we will step on it. It will be 100%. Again, boosting himself. Positive. The Russians are going to conquer. And then he goes, I'll skip a paragraph, but the next one. Now, the most popular conversations are, why are we losing? Why are we retreating? Why? That's now what the people are asking themselves. In response, various reasons are voiced. This is a lie that the authorities deceive and make unreliable reports. There are a lot of reasons, but the main thing is the system itself. The system criterion should be efficiency. The criteria in the army system should be nothing other than combat training and the ability of soldiers to kill enemies of the fatherland. The criteria for effectiveness is, are your soldiers capable of fighting? Are they capable of killing enemies? Are they capable of defeating the enemy while remaining less vulnerable to the enemy? And then this includes combat training, real, and not photo reports or not slides. It's, it goes about the administrative side and how these guys are trained. Stop the theory and make it practical. And he says, yeah, I wrote about it today. Just imagine, I once worked at the mine where we mined coal. We mined 500 tons. The guys worked well. If they did not extract 500 tons, bad. I can't imagine our mining master just taking pictures of coal and saying we were mining it and just filling our log. This cannot be so. You mean again like paperwork? But, translation is a little bit difficult from Russian, but please bear a little bit and try to see the context. But the question is different. That means different in the army. How quickly can we change anything? We saw a drawback. We need to change. We saw a person cannot cope. We need to change. Where we saw the problem, there we need to change. If, for example, we turned a blind eye to problems in the spring, we turned a blind eye to problems in the summer, and now we're retreating. And if we began to solve these problems in March, April, then of course, what is happening now will not be possible. Imagine our brothers and sisters in Krasny Liman, in Kupiansk, in Izium, again under the 5th, I don't know what that means, occupiers, under the 5th of these animals. Do you understand the state of these people? That is the civilians, no? Who are no longer young, who have our Russian principles, but they cannot defend themselves. We must protect them. And we cannot do this. We should be ashamed. I'm personally ashamed for everything that happens. I worry as if I am to blame for it. Therefore, guys, we need to open our eyes correctly to the problems. If we do not carry out the reforms in military affairs now, then we will continue to suffer defeats. It's obvious. I will repeat once again, the problems do not disappear on their own. Even despite the defeat, the morale of our fighters is high. The guys want to kill enemies, and the guys want to win. So this is just one part of the article. So let's go to So let's go to another reporter. Another article, another reporter. On Southfront.org. And the heading of this article is Situation crossing Lima hours before Russian withdrawal, says a Russian military reporter. And this military reporter is Senior Lieutenant Alexander Slatkov. And he described the situation in Krasny Liman a few hours before the Russian withdrawal. And again, I will leave the link in the description, and you can read it yourself. I will only read part of it. So it's unpleasant when you are standing on the outskirts near the city sign, which says Liman, with the flag of the Donetsk People's Republic. And the next day, the Ukrainian hangs their yellow and blue flag there. Of course, it's unpleasant. You understand? First, there was the flag of the Donetsk Republic, and the next day, there's Ukrainian flag. Now, this is all as psychological. He actually says, we were humiliated. Anyway, so he goes on. But I want to tell you, so he went to Liman. But I want to tell you, I arrived a few hours before we completely left Liman. And there was silence. There's silence. The settlement was not torn apart, and it was generally quiet. Some equipment was moving across. I will not discuss the rapid maneuvers of the Russian army. At first, we came to the temporary deployment point of the 208 Battalion bars. To be honest, I do not know how it stands for them now, a detachment of volunteers. So this is a battalion of volunteers that doesn't know what their condition is at this stage. There was a huge crater in the town. This was not a HIMARS, not a hurricane, not a tornado, but an aviation bomb. Are you listening? An aviation bomb. And the guy said that the Ukrainian aviation was active in Liman. Thus, it is not dead yet. Where are our air defense forces? This is the question. So what you read in between here is that there's an aviation bomb crater in the middle of Liman, that the Ukrainian aviation is still active, so they still have aircrafts, and that there were no anti-aircraft systems in Liman. Is that what how we assess the Russian army? Definitely not how I saw it. But this is what the guys say on the front, on the ground. And then it goes on, and I'll again skip a couple of paragraphs, and then it turned out that the Russian guys were redeployed. They were hit, but they left this deployment point without losses and moved away. So he was talking about the Russian soldiers. Then we drove to the command regiment of the DPR. Those are the militias. And I like the officers, he said. They have no fear at all and no reproaches in general. They did not complain. They did not raise their voices to anyone, reacted completely calmly to our arrival. And then he asked them, said, can I film you? And so a little bit of discussion on. And I'll skip a couple of paragraphs again. And then we come to a part that says, then after the interview, one of the officers took me aside and said, the situation is very bad. We have no connections with the 208 Battalion. The control point of the unit of the Russian Ministry of Defense disappeared somewhere, and no communications or interactions. What does that mean? It means that these DPI militias were left on their own, and the Russians were drawn, and there is no communication whatsoever with Central Command or with any other units. Is that how the Russian army operates? Again, this for me, this is credible. I don't see a reason why I should doubt it. But it's definitely not what we are trying to make or sketch the situation. And if you look at this, then you can understand why there are retreats and why there isn't a form of defeat. So just the next paragraph. Aviation, that means the Russian aviation pilots, called the command's regiment on the phone and said, guys, where should we hit? So the Russians are flying and saying, hey, we should have bombed the Ukrainians. And then the militia said, we don't know how to formulate targets for instructions. There is neither air support controller nor artillery spotter. What? Just do you hear the implication? Do you realize the implication of what is being said here? There's a total failure of the Russian command structure, down to flippant battalion level. This is serious stuff. This is not wishful thinking about the Ukrainians are having so many, losing so many manpower and losing so many tanks and APCs, and they cannot defend their positions. I will say one word here. Fuck! What the fuck is happening? And then there was another article, the new Ukrainian offensive in Kherson region. And it talks about the Kherson attack. And then several attacks were recently launched on the Russian military positions in the area of the Davidov Brod. Units of the 46th Separate Air Mobile Brigade and the 57th Motorized Brigade of Ukraine delivered pinpoint strikes with small assault groups on armored vehicles on Russian positions in poorly controlled areas. Now, I've recently said it on Larry, commented on Larry's blog, where I talked about it, that if I don't have the infrastructure, you've got to change the tactics. And I will send small groups, even across open field, just nicely dispersed, and go get within the artillery pieces have a lower limit. That means they cannot shoot nearer than 5 kilometers. They shoot from 5 kilometers up to 45 kilometers. But from 5, it becomes sort of not a no man's land, but you cannot use artillery in that area. And as soon as you reach that area, then you are basically effectively safe from 155. Other artillery has different ranges. I think Grad system has 3 kilometers or something like that. And then it becomes mano a mano. Then it becomes infantry against infantry, tanks versus anti-tanks, machine guns against mortars against mortars. That means infantry level fighting. And if you have some tanks and APCs, then it's a question of who shoots first and who sees one first, and there we go. That's a totally different game, ball game. And it seems to me that the Ukrainians are actually doing it. Says again, small assault groups on armored vehicles, on, not in, on, means the armored vehicles of the Russians. To the south, several dozen units of Ukrainian military equipment was transported to the left bank of the river near the village of Boshu Artakovo. Also, Ukrainian engineered units are trying to restore pontoon crossings near Andreevka and Lozovo. Hey, the Ukrainians are repairing pontoon crossings. So where's the attack of the Russians and the aviation destroying those pontoons? Are they even there? And then it says in the paragraph a little bit later on, the rotation of Ukrainian troops and the reconnaissance operations by small assault groups signaled the preparation for a large offensive in the area of Davidov Brod. They were also largely aimed at distracting Russian forces from the Ukrainian offensive in the north of the Kherson region. So as you can see, things are not that smooth running. It's not all hunky-dory. And I wish the pro-Russian punters will wake up a little bit and get down to business. So we can talk about the winter, we can talk about the winter offense and so on. And apparently what I see is that the Ukrainians are probably trying to do is push back the Russian forces up to a certain point where it would be very difficult to initiate a counteroffensive and then bog down for the winter. Maybe that's a strategy, I don't know. Maybe they are waiting for reinforcement or new deliveries of weapon systems. I wish just people would stop, me included, underestimating the Ukrainian forces. Especially since we are armchairs generals. Any case, so that's my story for today. If you like what you heard, press the like button, a dislike button, and subscribe to the channel. Let's grow the channel and let's promote it and see if we can convince some other people and wake them up so that we don't have the same situation in the Western world where we only have the same recirculated, regurgitated narrative and we're bullshitting ourselves all. So until next time, cheers.